Welcome to the Today Counts show. Today does count because it impacts, it influences your tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. The Today Counts podcast is sponsored by the generous donors of the Lead Today community. I'm your host, Tim Piper. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Today Counts show. Today I'd like you to meet a new friend of mine, a colleague. His name is Clint Pies. And Clint is the Chief People Officer. He's the Chief People Officer for MasTec Power and Delivery. It's a construction infrastructure company here in the United States. Clint comes from a tremendous background of human resource leadership, business leadership. And today we're going to be talking about difficult people. We're going to be talking about teams that are not aligned. We're going to be talking about culture. We're going to be talking about, just kind of doing some soul searching as to, how much do we contribute to teams not being aligned or organizations not being as healthy as they can be. I mean, we kind of go all over the place in this, although we follow a pretty clear outline that we're dealing with trying to create healthy organizations, healthy teams, and healthy leaders. I could probably talk to Clint for days at a time. I find him exhaustive in what he does and how he thinks. We did not have time to get into some of his talent assessment processes, which I think are also extremely dynamic, and I hope that we'll get to do that in the future. So for now, know that he is happily married to Molly for 23 years. He's got 4 kids. And they are Anna, Daniel, Natalie, and Adam. They're active in the community, coaching youth sports, volunteering. He's an outdoorsy kind of a guy, and you'll pick up a lot of things about where he's at and what he likes and what he doesn't like. But I hope that you will enjoy this casual conversation about a not so casual subject. Clint, thank you for taking the time to join me on the Today Counts show.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Jim. It's great to be here. And I will tell you, every time I get an opportunity to spend some time with you, it's a pleasure. And like you said, I think not only colleagues, but opportunity to become better and better friends as time passes by. So thanks again for having me.
Well, you've kind of memorized me in your skill sets, and I've seen you at work. And I really appreciate what you do, and I appreciate the genius that God has, injected into your DNA. I know that probably in a natural way, you carry the credentials to be the Chief People Officer at MasTec. But talk to us a little bit about that. What is a Chief People Officer at MasTec, and how did you kind of journey, to that place in your career?
Yeah, great. So thanks for that. So for me, Jim, being the Chief People Officer, and I'll try to put it in pretty simple terms for people, I think it comes down to a couple things. Number one, to champion culture for the business. And I'm a big Peter Drucker culture eats strategy for breakfast believer. Yes. So that's a fundamental. We're all responsible for culture, but I think it's my job, my team's job really to serve as a culture champion in the business. But beyond that, really, it's all about aligning structure, people or talent, processes, and rewards with the business's strategy to make sure we're best positioned to achieve the outcomes that we have, strategic priorities as well as more immediate business priorities as well.
Good. Clint, a lot of leaders ask me this question. They ask me, they say, what is culture? What exactly is culture? How do you define that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, when I think about everything that we're trying to do from a team perspective, right? Passion, teams with integrity, confidence, not cocky, hard work, having a spirit of what's the right word? Esprit de corps, making sure that we have the right environment that is most conducive to producing the best work that people have to bring to the table, right? I think the more people are engaged and feel like they're a part of something, the more productive they are, and in turn, the business is successful and produces the right outcome. So having the right culture, I think it is a foundational element for everything else that we do.
Yeah, I often look at it as, the more that a group of people can have a shared sense of beliefs and behaviors, we get alignment, and with alignment, we get speed, we get agility. And some will say, businesses or relationships only go at the speed of trust. So, that makes a lot of sense. But how did you come to this place? I mean, when did you decide to be this organizational expert, this people expert, this leadership, expert? Did you know that from an early age? Did you kind of how did that happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I thought about this a lot. So, blue collar kid, I grew up in an environment. My dad was a blue collar guy, worked for the same company, the same organization for over 45 years in a blue collar type role. My mom was a teacher. For me personally, I grew up in a lot of situations where I was the kid for whatever reason they threw at difficult circumstances, and I think having a blue collar background, going to school, pursuing an education, some different things that put me in a position where I was able to communicate with a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, walks of lives, and life. And what happened to me was early career working for Visteon, spun off from Ford Motor Company. I worked in safety, believe it or not, and was a plant that wasn't particularly great from a safety record perspective. So my job was to go out on the floor every day, and rather than try to worry too much about the different programs, policies, and procedures that were important, most definitely important, the number one thing I did was listen to people out on the shop floor and try to respond in a thoughtful fashion to what they needed. And if I thought what they needed wasn't relevant or important, I would tell them that too in very adult terms. But it was easy for me to go back then to the engineers or the management side of the business and help represent the needs of the people and figure out how to make things work together. And over time, this ability to communicate with people on the shop floor or on the management team put me in a position where I went into labor relations. And from labor relations, I ended up ultimately in an HR business partner role, where again, it was all about serving as a culture champion, listening to all the people that we have, and then making sure that we were aligning our structure, talent, process, reward systems with the desired outcomes of the business. And it takes me back to the point you made earlier around culture, right? So aligning all this stuff with not just our business strategy, but our vision and values. With where is it that we ultimately want to go, and what are those values that we cling to that serve as the foundation for the business.
A lot of smaller companies, the local sandwich shop, the local auto repair shop, they typically don't have the advantage of having an HR person. And I think I even mentioned to you some time back that, to the best of my recollection, even in my banking days at Bank of America, maybe we had an HR department. I mean, I don't know how we could not have. I mean, being a global company, but I do not remember in the early 1980s having. I can't remember being referred to it. I can't remember resources coming from it. It seemed like my boss was always the one to hand me the little a benefits package, and the vacation choosing, and all those kinds of things. But today, I work with a lot of smaller companies that, from an academic definition, they would be considered small, but they might have 100 employees, 200 employees, 300 employees, and they're starting to hire HR professionals on their team. But Clint, they themselves tell me, as well as the HR person that I might be connecting with, they don't know how this is supposed to work. They don't know what the role of the HR director is. Let's call them that for now. The owner, starts with handing off tasks like managing payroll, those kinds of things. And where you kind of stopped me in my tracks some time ago is when you used the phrase that you view yourself as a business partner. Before we get into this topic of difficult people, which I really do want us to get into that meat, I'm still at the higher elevation where maybe we could give some positive direction and vision about what is the role of HR from your perspective. What do you think the healthy role is of that HR function within an organization that's just starting to figure out that they need it?
Yeah, I will tell you the most fundamental level, and this is where I think we make the transition from the old school personnel department that took care of, just benefits or payroll or those kind of things, but more into the business itself. I think the expectation at this point in time is that HR people show up and they know the business. So sometimes, Jim, I even hate having an HR label next to my name
Yes.
because for old school people, it carries a certain there's an image that goes with it that I don't like. So for me, showing up as a partner who knows the business, who understands how we make money, what levers we need to pull in order to make money, how we organize our resources, and position the business to achieve goals in the most efficient fashion possible, I think is critically important. So for my teams, the concept of know the business is number one. And if you know the business, you can do things to enable the business. And I think probably the word that comes to mind for me is catalyst. Our job is to help make situations better or improve outcomes. Now, there are also certainly, I think, more functional things that we do own along the way, right? I think everyone knows, it's all about talent, right? I don't think I can listen to a podcast or read an article where a CEO doesn't talk about, talent, talent, talent. And we've even led different board presentations with the tagline, ability to execute the plan is paced by talent. So I think for human resources to lead a talent forward agenda where we're ensuring that we have the right leadership and technical capabilities in the business to achieve our near term and longer term objectives over, say, a 3-year horizon is critically important for us. And what my team brings to the table from a strategic theme perspective, and there are a lot of initiatives that can fit in multiple buckets here, but it's all about making sure that we're well positioned to attract and acquire the right talent, again, the right leadership, technical capabilities, but even beyond that, the right fit. Talk about dealing with difficult people. If we get people who fit in our organization, not just followers, but people who can challenge and do it the right way, we can improve our batting average, right? Developing our people, making sure that we're focused on helping people get better in the roles that they're in today and or developing capabilities that may be weaknesses for us today. It could be capabilities that we're going to need from a technological fashion, over a near-term horizon, things that we need to build out over the next 2 to 3 years, along with our strategic horizon. Engagement, so I would say motivating, rewarding, and retaining our people. We can blunt the need to hire people if we can keep the people that we have and then develop them. Engagement, I think, is a big part of this conversation on dealing with difficult people. If we can provide the right environment that's most conducive to success or bringing out the best in people, not only do we keep our people, but we also have them engaged and operating at a much more productive level. And the last one that I think is really important for me personally is the concept of protect. In a lot of cases, we think about safety and most certainly making sure that we protect the health and safety of our employees. Number one priority for my team and everyone, certainly in the organizations that I've been a part of. That's a value that's number one for me anywhere that I would even consider going. But beyond that, it's protecting the best interests of the business. And that could be compliance type things. But it's also making sure that we protect our people and, again, create the right environment that's most conducive to success in delivering the outcomes that are expected from all of our shareholders.
I didn't really tee you up for that, but I'm glad that you followed that little pitch that I gave you, because as you know, what I do is I'm often the ear of many leaders who outside of the conference room will tell me what they really think. And, they won't tell me what they really think in the conference room, which I think is part of this bigger topic, that we'll get into here in just a minute. But these are nasty, ugly things. But these are some of the things that I've heard people refer to HR about, and that's exactly why I wanted you on the show, because I think it will educate the business leader, the ministry leader, the nonprofit leader, and why this is such a critical place in our day to day. But these are some of the ugly things, and I want to call them out because I saw some of the notes that that you plan on talking about today that really quickened me in this area. But necessary evil, legalities, busybodies, policemen, an easy out for supervisors, taking leaders off the hook, so to speak, from learning to have good and difficult conversations. They don't want to deal with it. Just send them to HR, right? It's kind of like the principal's office, which I was actually in the principal's office quite a bit when I was in elementary and junior high. And we won't go into that. I wasn't quite aligned with the vision of how they wanted things to go versus how I wanted to live. Well, as an executive coach, as a leadership coach, that's really more the way that I brand myself as a leadership coach versus executive coach, only because executive usually reflects corporate America, and I have a kind of a broader reach than that. But one of the things that I would say as a leadership coach that frustrates me, that kind of not that I've arrived, Clint, in no way, shape, or form, because when I see the mistakes that leaders make today, I often go, yeah, I remember doing that. I remember not doing that, and then I look back and say, what would have been like if I would have had a mentor a little more closely associated, helping me understand, conflict, help me understand alignment. I don't even think I heard the term alignment until I was well into my career. But I think the thing that I'm gonna tee up this difficult people thing here for you in this way. What frustrates me to no end is how grown men and women still seem to have difficulty in having productive, truthful conversations that are helpful, for the individuals and the organization as a whole. What I have found, and it does seem like junior high, is I have found that there's a lot of conversations going on about what's going well and what's not going well on a team, in an organization, but rarely is it being discussed in the right places and at the right times and for the right purposes. And then yes, I have sometimes run across. I'm not a big believer in bad guys. I'm more, to your point in the beginning, that leaders really need to work hard at building a certain kind of culture. If they don't know what kind of a culture that they want to build, they're in a heap of trouble right from the beginning because they've turned the reins over to anarchy. And that may sound like an exaggeration, but it is what I see, what I experience on a regular basis. And the scary thing is they don't even know that they've created a culture of anarchy because it's somewhat hidden from them when they don't look at the facts. So I've been on a mission for the last 10 years to step up my game a little bit and learn how to tell the truth in ways that I would want to hear it, because it's always difficult to hear truth about yourself that maybe isn't, how many blinds, we all have blind spots, right?
That's right.
So in your role, because you pretty much are responsible for the organization from top to bottom. So you're not just working with the C-suite, you're not just working with the vice presidents, you're not just working with the directors. I mean, you're meeting people from A to Z. But there are difficult people in our organizations, on our teams. Maybe not lost causes, but difficult people. So can we dive into that? What have you learned in your career to help us with this whole thing of conflict and alignment and difficult conversations and difficult people? Some people just don't want to play.
That's right. I've learned a couple things along the way as I've worked with different business leaders. And at this point in time, I've had the opportunity to participate on several, I'll say three real big leadership teams and some bigger leadership roles. And like you said, it's playing at all levels to help create the right tone and culture. Um, but it is interesting. One common theme I've heard from all the different leaders, not just C-suite leaders, but directors and above. I had no idea how much of my time I would spend on people issues. Right? We work with human beings who are the most complex creatures, right, in the world, and bringing different perspectives, different values, different experiences, different capabilities, the different levels of maturity, different levels of performance, and figuring out how to navigate through all that is so tricky. And that's where I've been able to develop relationships with leaders. And I think one of the things that's helped me be successful in the role that I'm in today, Jim, is just to invest a lot of time at every organizational level, have a lot of conversations with people, really seek to build trust by listening and then responding in a thoughtful fashion to their needs and or treating people like adults. If they have a concern or a need that may not be aligned with where we're trying to go as an organization, having those conversations and telling them, but being direct and treating them like adults. And really always focusing, and you'll hear me talk about this again and again. My people probably think I'm a broken record, right? Not trying to respond to difficult situations, not with emotion, but to take a deep breath, to pause and come back at things in a very thoughtful fashion. So I always talk about that. We want to have a thoughtful response, not an emotional reaction. We want to attack every opportunity with constructive candor, not with, not trying to pacify people, not trying to navigate around difficult or challenging situations, but hit it head on. And the other thing I can tell you, not in every case, but in most cases, the vast majority of cases, we work with good people, right? Good people who I always talk to my team about trusting the intent. They want to get to the right outcomes in the right places. And we kind of have a little fun with this too and talk about what are difficult people and some difficult behaviors. But one of the biggest things that I have learned along the way, and exercises like this, right, when I'm talking to you, Jim, in an environment that I genuinely enjoy, it's easy to kind of laugh about some of this stuff and talk about it. But there are situations where, someone challenges us or we don't like the direction of the business and we have a tendency to paint someone with the difficult brush, right? And that's not necessarily the case. I can think about many examples from a career perspective. And I can tell you, if you talk to my wife or my kids, I'm sure they could give you a few examples of where I've been the difficult person here in our personal lives as well,
Yeah.
for a number of reasons.
I might be tagged with that from time to time as well. Yeah.
It certainly happens, but you can think of those situations, right? Certainly where you
Yeah.
have to deal with a person who's highly confrontational or very pointed and angry and pushy. Certainly know-it-alls, or I call some of these people snipers, right? Who look for the opportunity to make you look foolish whenever they can, right? With a well-timed, sarcastic comment, or they roll their eyes in a meeting in front of others. We've all dealt with people who rant and rave about things that really have nothing to do with present circumstances. Those are difficult people. And certainly situations that are a little bit more hostile. It goes beyond just very basic complaining into real quarrelsome situations that impact, team dynamics and put the business in a position where it's not achieving the outcomes, right? They have a chilling effect on situations. So just a few things maybe to help set the stage for this thing. And I always go back to that Peter Drucker culture eats strategy for breakfast. And you'll hear me say this from time to time again and again. But there's this concept I like to apply: what you ignore becomes more, and what you address becomes less. And I can't tell you how many times I have stepped into situations, and I, Jim, based on our conversations, it's the same for you, where leaders or team members have chosen to ignore behaviors. And sometimes, by the way, I think that's probably appropriate. You have to decide if the juice is worth the squeeze, right? Do you really want to try and address a situation? But when you're in a position where someone's behavior is impacting the team's ability to move forward or to reach the desired outcomes, you got to take care of it. You've got to address it, right? And I think that's that's a critical part of this conversation as well.
Yeah, if I could interject this before you start diving into some of the skill sets or understandings. First of all, what a brilliant statement. What you ignore becomes more. What you address becomes less. But even before that, you said something or you implied or inferred something, and I wrote it down as a question. What do you believe about people? As a leader, that's a really good question, I think, to ask ourselves, to put ourselves in the middle of the room and to walk around ourselves in our mind's eye, because our worldview and people are certainly a big part of our world. So how we feel about people, I mean, let's face it, the small business person often feels that most people are thieves,
Mhm.
right? I mean, that would come with that experience, a lot of trust given often at early ages, or more difficult economic situations, that kind of thing. And in corporate America, there is tags that say that there's a lot of laziness that can be in there. If you start believing these things as a general truth, then it certainly, I would think, is going to what's the word I'm looking for? Corrupt an honest approach to what we're going to be talking about, or what we are already talking about. But that's just, I mean, those are two different statements, but boy, do they fit in this conversation. What we ignore becomes more, and what we address becomes less, or what you address becomes less. So I think you're going to dive off from here, aren't you?
Yeah, for sure. And the idea of having a very intentional culture, thoughtfully building teams and surrounding yourself with people that you trust. You may not necessarily see eye to eye with people every day, right? That's a part of diversity in general, right? Diversity in thought is a key concept here too. But having people that you trust and know are there to win and win the right way, those are critical elements for me, really, as I look at building out any team and making sure that we're set up to be as effective as possible.
Clint, before you dive into this, what do you believe about people?
So I've been told before that I wear rose-colored glasses from time to time, and I've been told that I not necessarily need to be more pessimistic, excuse me, but try to take it down the middle a little bit. And I can think of one leader I worked for in particular, giving me that feedback. I still talk to him on a regular basis. I think it was good coaching for me along the way. But I do think most people are good, and I do think they want to do good things and contribute to the success of teams and to the business. So I think for us, setting clear expectations with people, helping them understand their roles and responsibilities, and how they ladder up to support the bigger, broader business. They're a part of something bigger. I think that's critically important. You've got to make them feel like and believe they're a part of something bigger, or they contribute to the success of the organization.
Yeah, it's a big question to ask someone, and maybe not a fair one, for a full 360. But one, if I could add to yours, because you even mentioned it in your definition. But I think I would start with saying my view of people has something to do with I will know more, I will learn more about the truth of people if I'm in an accountable culture and an accountable relationship. I have found that often leaders are afraid to hold people accountable in fear of, and then you could, fill out the multiple choices of that. But when they step up and hold people accountable, I think they're most often very delighted in what they find, especially if it's not a hit and run. If it's a culture of short accounts, a culture of communication, a culture of this is how we win, that kind of a culture. I think in general most people respond to that. Even those who might come from a difficult childhood, I still think, and I do believe childhood has a lot to do with where that adult lands at 30 or 35, or and even older. But but I find accountability to be an antidote to a lot of the things that we might be talking about today.
Jim, it's interesting. I'm looking at one of the notes that I have on the page in front of me. And I think this is fundamental for any leader who wants to elevate in an organization, right? Unresolved conflict can drain the mind and body of energy, right? I fundamentally believe that. And then you go a step further with it, right? Life is better lived when problems are resolved, and working in a positive way to find a resolution doesn't only produce, the desired outcomes, but you have a more positive journey along the way. And I can honestly tell you, I've been in plenty of situations where I viewed someone as negative or difficult to work with. I'm sure they viewed me that way as well. But we found a way to come together, took a deep breath, to come together and work through issues to resolve problems or challenges. And I can think of, my wife kind of laughs at me for this sometimes too. Throughout my career, I can think of probably 3 or 4 people who I really struggled with, who today, I haven't worked with them in 10, 15 years, but I talk to them every month, right? Some of my closest colleagues or confidants or people that I lean into for advice and guidance. So we came at things from completely different perspectives. And I absolutely labeled them as difficult. And I was sure that they were difficult and they were the problem. But I think having the opportunity to kind of work through some exercises like this or conversations like we're having today, having some great mentors who helped me think through things more logically, it put me in a position to work through problems and develop some unbelievable relationships, and then look back at progress, those companies made over, 12, 18, 24, 36 months. We had a lot of fun, right? And that journey was a lot more fun once we figured out how to, navigate around different personalities and work together.
I was part of a church one time where I would often hear from the stage a phrase. In fact, I think it was a church in Illinois, Willow Creek Community Church, I think it was. Bill Hybels said something that really caught my attention, and I think it speaks to what we're talking about. He said something to the idea that he wanted to create a culture at his church where it was a safe place. And then he paused and he said, to hear a dangerous message.
Mm.
And I think that when you want to win the Super Bowl, you know that you're going to have to put in the work, and you know that you're going to be part of a culture that isn't going to put up with those who want easy. And as you continue to describe this, I mean, you're bringing out all kinds of ideas in me as I'm listening to you talk. One of them is inner conflict. That if we're talking about conflict, we're talking about dealing with difficult people. Maybe even coming back into the source. The inner person that I am. Do I tell myself the truth? And if I do tell myself the truth, am I also kind enough to recognize that I'm a human and I'm not perfect, I'm not close to perfect, but I can grow. In other words, an adult conversation. There's a lot of people that I run into, Clint, who, they might be a VP and they might be 40 years old, but they're still operating in many ways, not always, but in many ways from that 8-year-old person or that 14-year-old person, and they really haven't addressed their inner child, so to speak, and it's keeping them back, from that. So if you push the button on that person, you often might find that you're dealing with that 8-year-old person, that 14-year-old person, and I think that when I've already got 5 pages of notes just listening to you, but one of the things I did is I created 2 columns as you were talking. One was technical, and one was leadership, and I kind of boil things down into those two broad categories. But so much of what we're talking about today is leadership, and it starts with ourselves, does it not?
Absolutely. And, preparing for this, conversation was really good for me, right? Probably more self-reflection than anything, and I started thinking about this, when we look in the mirror and start to figure, here are a couple of the concepts that I have listed out that I wanted to get into a little bit today, right? When we start believing that we're the one who's right without looking in the mirror, right? We immediately start to tighten up and we start to treat others a certain way, right? And once we are the right person and determine that the other person is indeed, wrong or the difficult person, we may start to act with a little more bad intent, and we don't give the situation an opportunity to change, right? So then we live
That's
with our
strong.
assumptions, and it's hard for us to give the other person the chance that we need to, or to approach it and recognize that maybe we're the ones who are wrong indeed. So we've got to be able to look in the mirror and figure out, hey, look, is this about me? Is this my own bias? Is this my own issue? And then start to get into the subject of whether or not the other person is difficult.
Yeah, I was speaking to another executive yesterday afternoon, and we were talking about how to lead at an elevated level, a level that he had not been at before. And so we talked about the concepts of being proactive, expansive, seeing the solution to problems before they mature, getting ahead of that. And that was a whole new uncomfortable place for him because his brand, you would probably say that he could be branded as a soldier. He was a really good soldier, and now he's expected to look out in the horizon and be ahead of things. And so then we talked about another type of inner conflict that was going on. I love how this is starting, Clint. Because if we just get into the tactics of how we bring down the anxiety, how we bring down the we might be skipping a step, and I think I think intuitively we both kind of have landed. Oh yeah, we should probably start with ourselves. But anyway, and then I shared with him something that I learned from my mistakes, and so much of my coaching comes from my mistakes. I hate to say it. I would like to say I was just born knowing this stuff, but I've got all these scars in my soul around me that when I see somebody doing something, it triggers pain from one of those scars. And I say, stop. So one of the things I shared with them is I said, well, so then when you get out in front and then you're trying to sell, things, because when you get in a large organization, understanding what organizational savvy is again a lot different than the local sandwich shop. And things aren't always clear as to reporting relationships and what influence is and how to move, get the ball down the field, et cetera, et cetera. Then I said, now be careful of this. So now as you're learning to elevate your leadership and begin to see things that need to be improved and expanded on, and you start influencing it, you don't have to be right. You can say out loud, I think this is what we can do. I think this is how we can do it. This is where I'd like to start and see how things go. Versus what we're often tempted to do, I'm kind of coming right off of what you were saying about if you go in with the idea that you're right. But I'm not even talking about interpersonal conflict as much as I am about the fact that conflict is normal in leadership. Even when you're trying to improve the organization, as soon as you try to start improving the organization, you have stepped into conflict. Because a lot of the organization likes where it's at, regardless if it's sinking or not. And so when you start trying to move the organization forward, you experience conflict. But one of the mistakes that you can make is you can say, here's the plan, it's going to work A to Z. Because as soon as the plan doesn't work, and then it blows up in your face, and there you are, you took responsibility for things that you didn't have to. But when you say, I think, and maybe, and what if, and why don't we try this, then what you do is you invite other people into the conversation.
Yeah, shared problem. It's interesting, Jim. The guy I work for very well, Zach, and
Yes,
he's the guy people want to run through brick walls for.
right.
And one of the reasons I was interested in this role, recognizing that there's a big build that has to happen in the organization that I'm a part of today, But it wasn't a, hey, come in, this is your job specifically. Certainly, he had a framework of things that we need to accomplish that I'm aligned to, and I think have the right experience to help with. But it was a, hey, look, here's the problem that we have. How are we going to attack it together? And that's the frame we try to apply to problem solving in general. I think as a leadership team that we're building out in this current organization. And again, I've been very fortunate to work in some really good organizations with smart, thoughtful leaders who have helped engage me that way. And now there's a lot to, flying at the right altitude. Hey, where am I going to make the call on something versus where am I going to let the team bring the ideas forward and make them our challenges to be solved and plan together. So, Jim, I think it's a great point. Great thought.
Well, I kind of interrupted your stream of consciousness. So if you can regain that somehow and keep going,
Well, I thought
that'd
it
be
might
great.
be kind of interesting. So when I was thinking through this, and it's interesting thinking about it personally, I was checking a lot of boxes next to some bullets that I put together. I thought it might be interesting just to spend 2 minutes, 3 minutes together and seek to define what makes a person difficult, right? And I'm always careful with that, right? There's a lot of subjectivity into it,
It's
but
when they
just thinking
disagree
about,
with me,
well,
right?
that was my number one. But I was thinking about this. What makes someone, a difficult person, right? And there are hundreds of articles you can read on it. Just Google difficult people, and you'll find a dozen lists of characteristics, attributes, behaviors of difficult people. But the test that I tried to apply to this, hey, most reasonable adults, if they experience these behaviors or know someone who chronically exhibits these behaviors or characteristics, attributes, what we collectively define that person as difficult. And I think that's the case. So I made a list of about 15 items. And by the way, I think this is an easy exercise. You don't have to close your eyes. You don't have to take a deep breath. I think we can all think about people in our lives, personal, professional, who are difficult. And if you just off the top of your head start to list off some of the behaviors that maybe classify someone as difficult, it'd be interesting to go through it. So what I'll do, I'm going to take the page that I have that has this list, I'm going to turn it over. Right. I haven't looked at this in a little while, but I think it'd be interesting for us just to kind of go through those, maybe a little bit of fun. What makes someone difficult?
Great. I'll throw out one. A lack of accommodation. They're not very accommodating.
Yeah, I would agree with that one. So maybe that builds up on selfishness, right? It's all
Yeah.
about them, all
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I've dealt with plenty of people who it doesn't matter what's going on. It can be a 75-degree day with a nice breeze in the middle of the summer on a Saturday, and it's still negative energy that they're bringing to the table. There's something wrong somewhere.
Yeah. I think there are people who carry a negative energy about them, and they're not even aware of it. And I'm going to go back to the childhood thing, but I think a lot of it does stem from not dealing with whatever that is. I would agree with you 100%. I would also say I would say it in this way: why do they have to find a problem when there is no problem? That was kind of my blue collar statement when I was in my 20s. I did notice that I ended up in a group where there was a few that seemed to always find something wrong with something.
Always.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so, so maybe what I'll do. So this is interesting. When I was doing my self-reflection, I went through this list,
Oh, I have
and I
another one.
was, yeah. Let's hear it.
They just can't admit they're wrong or say they're sorry. And dear God, they're never going to ask for forgiveness. Was that Fonzie who couldn't say he was wrong? Is on Happy Days, I think it
Oh,
was
that's
something
right.
like that.
That's right. I'm here in Wisconsin, so it's Happy Days country too.
Right.
Oh, so it's interesting. I went through this, right, and these aren't exactly clinical terms, but they're the way that I was describing people in my own mind, right? Pot
Yeah.
stirrers. This goes right with what you said: failure to accept responsibility for their actions or behaviors, right? Arrogance, attention seeking, blatant disrespect or disregard for established policy procedures, passive aggressiveness, probably the one that irritates
Oh,
me more than anything else.
That's a good one.
Unmotivated or lazy, failure to
Hmm.
comply with deadlines, whatever the case may be. People who oppose new ideas, they want to argue about everything. That's a problem, clearly, in the organization that I'm in today. In a few pockets, we're trying to work through that. People who resist feedback. I think you have to have a culture where people are open to receiving feedback. Of course, it's important to frame that in a constructive fashion. I don't think it's normal for anyone just to accept feedback
Right.
on any given day. People who misrepresent the story or lie, know-it-alls, and then I started to really branch out with some of these thoughts, Jim. But snipers, I think I mentioned that earlier. The people who like to take shots at you or make you look foolish with that well-timed zinger when you're in the meeting. I highlighted chronic complainers and whiners, people who I call volcanoes. They tend to erupt when they don't get their way. Certainly, we've all worked with bulldozers, the people who have to do it their way and they're going to run everybody over. Pessimists, muzzles, people who have a chilling effect on everyone in the room. Gossipers, stallers, the dictators, um, people who align with the prevailing wind. If the boss says one thing, by God, they're going to align to that no matter what. There are a lot of different behaviors that we can assign to people. So I was even thinking about this, okay, getting off my own personal issues and what I've got to get through. What do we do to more effectively deal with or work with people who are, maybe by definition, difficult?
Yeah, I wonder. I wonder how many people, we would know as difficult when they were in elementary school, and now they're 50 and they're still difficult, or how many people, for whatever reason, go through seasons where, for whatever reason, they're difficult people. I don't really expect a comment on that. I was just kind of wondering, you know, that way. Because I have met some people that I haven't known my whole life, and I kind of wonder, have they always been like this, or is there something, something different? So how do we deal with these people?
Yeah, I have to tell you, it's interesting too. When I hear people, and this is not what you said, by the way. I think you believe in the good in people, and that people can be coached, developed along the way, and we all need coaching. I'm far from perfect myself, but I can't tell you how many times I've gone to coach someone or have a conversation, and I try to frame things in a constructive fashion, do it at the right environment, at the right time, all those things. And I've actually heard from people, wow, that's the first time anyone's given me that feedback in really direct terms. And I'm talking about people in their 40s and 50s, right? Who I think have a genuine desire to do things differently or to do things better. Um, and there is this concept. I have a boss I used to work for who would always say, "Hey, one awe, SH wipes out 10 attaboys." And I think there's some truth to that. So a lot of the conversation I have with people as we work through opportunities to get better or not, to be less difficult, is, hey, look, where we're trying to get, there's some aspiration to this. We don't expect people to be perfect, but we're striving for continuous personal improvement, right? So we're going to give people some grace along the way. And I'm very fortunate in my life that, some of my career options, relationships with family, with colleagues, that people have given me a lot of grace along the way. So I think if all of us approach these opportunities to build relationships with a little more humility and grace, it will be a much more constructive exercise. I hope that resonates with people.
I do too, and because don't you find that empathy is a big piece of what makes a leader effective?
Absolutely. I think it's critically important.
So what I have to say to myself, if I really have run into somebody other than myself who I have labeled a difficult person, is to say to myself what my dad has always taught me, is that, Jim, everybody has a story, and maybe that, maybe, it doesn't give them a get out of jail free card, but it should cause me pause, should make me a little more pensive, a little more interested in that person, and not just resolving the conflict. Because if that were the case, it may not be transformational in nature, and therefore, in the end, won't accomplish anything. Not that we all have to be walking therapists. I'm not saying that, but I like what you said about humility. I think that when we do see human tragedies, it should cause pause for us. You know, it's not like we're gonna throw them in a trash can and put them on the curb and have them, taken away. But it should cause pause. It should cause, you know, even what we just experienced there, a little bit of silence, just kind of wondering.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you completely. I think people have a need to be heard, right? Right, wrong, or indifferent, Jim. I think people who are executive coaches and HR professionals, good business leaders in general, have made a living and continue to make a living off of helping organizations navigate through challenging interpersonal dynamics, right? And everybody has a story to tell. So for me, right, when I start to figure out how to deal with a difficult person, I always want to know, how big is the situation? What is the issue? And try to determine how much investment I really, really want to make in it. And I'll kind of give a flip side to that thought as well, or that theme that we just went on that I believe in wholeheartedly. I think there does come a point in time, and this is where organizations need a lot of help as well to make sure they do things the right way, where there's a situation that's creating enough distress, impacting team dynamics and creating negative consequences that you have to address it, right? And where you do need to set clear expectations. And if a person can't meet your behavioral expectations, then organizations do frequently, maybe not frequently, but organizations do need to make tough calls and make changes, right? So where we can coach up and develop people and figure out how to create the right dynamics with teams and with individuals, I think it's great. But there are going to be circumstances where we can't. And when we identify those circumstances, again, what you address becomes less, what you ignore becomes more. I have seen companies hang on, and hang on because they were afraid or paralyzed, right? They couldn't cut that person loose for whatever reason, and it certainly impacted org dynamics. It impacted the credibility of leaders. So I think, I work with a lot of smart and really thoughtful people who I do think believe in, the best in people. But at the end of the day, once we stack hands and know we need to make a change, we typically make those changes. And I think that's part of my job, is to help make sure we do those things the right way, that consider the individual, but certainly consider the best interests of the business as well.
How does a leader come to that conclusion that this isn't going to work out and they need to take that step?
Yeah, so one, I think, Jim, you can see like wrinkles. If you look close, you see I'm losing my hair. Some of it's just experience, right? Where you know intuitively what the punchline is going to be on a situation. But I think there is a process that we need to work through, right? Where we take the time to put together a really thoughtful plan around how we want to address a situation. And I think it starts with providing feedback, candid feedback. I always tell my people we want to be as constructive as possible and offer specific examples around the different situations that are out there. And again, it's another thing. Every situation is different and requires a different approach. So there's a framework for walking through these situations, but I think recognizing that every situation is unique and different is critically important. So maybe just a few steps for me, right, that I always try to walk through. Number one, before we do anything, I always try to remind the teams that are working through these problems that we need to empower ourselves beyond the difficult person's reach. People are going to react with emotions, and we should never be caught off or surprised by that. We're human beings. So we need to prepare ourselves and seek to manage through those potentially difficult situations. But for me, understanding what is the difficult person's issue, what are their motivators, right? Is this a task issue? Is it a people issue, a personality conflict? Is it a direction of the team issue, right? So literally going through the exercise to write this out for me, right? What is the situation? Define it so we can all look at it and get our arms around it. Setting ourselves up to have a conversation with a person, really to understand their perspective, I think is a critical step in this process. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I think making sure that we are thoughtful. I put things down on a piece of paper not to script myself ever or to script my leaders, but to make sure that we are very carefully choosing the words that we're going to use and try to put things in the most constructive fashion possible and avoid words that might trigger someone. Again, if our goal is to have a constructive conversation and try to resolve a conflict, speaking calmly and watching your tone, striving to maintain poise. That's part of that, empowering yourself to, to go beyond the reach of a difficult person. I think that's a key concept as well. And then there are textbook items here as well, that we've all heard, right? State your positive intentions, communicate your own needs, use the I terms. I think those are important as well. I do think it's important, and I know I'm hitting these things kind of fast, Jim, and we can come back around maybe and talk about a few of these bullets. It's okay to acknowledge a person's concerns as well. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but sometimes flexing a little empathy in these conversations is important and provides some kind of validation. It doesn't excuse a behavior or let someone off the hook necessarily, but it gives them a chance to really put their concerns out there. And in my case, I take a lot of notes, and that's probably the HR side of me, the compliance, the risk management side of things. I always take a lot of notes. But I want those notes so that I can refer back to them and make sure I really understand the key points that another person or the quote difficult person has brought to the table. Maybe just a couple other things, and we'll go back to it. And this is one that I always put in bold, and it speaks to how I view people in general. I do think in general people have positive intent. I think people aren't self-aware. They don't know how they come across to others. I think they may have legitimate concerns at times. They don't know how to express those, right? So I think giving people an opportunity to put their concerns out there, however they come across, is important. So trying to understand them, it's that whole Covey seek first to understand piece. I think is really critically important. And if we have all these bullets kind of covered, then we can start to put together a game plan for how we want to deal with that difficult person. Does that make sense, Jim?
It does. I had a question for you and a comment. The question is, when you mentioned that we still should be able to acknowledge a person's concerns, even if they don't have merit, or at least we disagree with it or whatever. What does that look like exactly? So, you're having this difficult conversation, they rebuff it, they protest, or they whatever. And so to acknowledge the concern without going where you don't want it to go. I mean, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I can think of a few different circumstances or situations, in manufacturing business and even in personal life. I think in a lot of cases you can kind of anticipate some of these questions as well, because you've heard the people express the concerns over and over and over again
They,
to the
they
point where
mostly
it's
come off as excuses, right? Sound like excuses. Okay.
absolutely
Yeah.
excuses, or they're just exhausting where someone's frustrated with something that's going on in an organization. And what I like to do is kind of bullet some ideas out for myself in advance and be able to speak to it. Look, I understand your perspective, but here's where we are, right? This is our current circumstance from a business perspective. We're working long hours because we have to meet customer expectations, or, this person is the boss and this is their expectation. And by the way, the boss isn't doing anything to create a hostile work environment or anything unethical. They're driving towards this end. They get to make that call, right? So I think being able to hit people head on with, hey, look, these are the facts, and the circumstances concerning this issue or topic that we're talking about in very adult terms, but without emotion, is sometimes disarming.
Good. Good. And then the comment that I wanted to make, see what you thought about it, is, and I don't want to run. I need to explain it a little bit, but when I experience this personally, or I see it happening, what am I talking about? It's when the leader begins leading or catches themselves leading over or under or around that next level leader that's supposed to be executing X, Y, and Z, but as their supervisor, I catch myself leading around them, under them, and over them is a huge tell of one of two things, or I suppose a combination of things. One is a pretty bad leader, or I'm practicing pretty bad leadership, because of whatever. Maybe I secretly want their job versus my job. But typically it's because they're not performing, and I'm procrastinating having these conversations. I'm procrastinating holding them accountable, and so I've allowed the monkey to come on my shoulder, and now I am doing the work. But for some reason, I'm frustrated by it, but I allowed it to happen. I don't think that is a rare occurrence. It seems to me that it is something that happens. But to your point about, where you generally believe in the good intent of people, but then the first thing that came out of your mouth after that was, however, there seems to be a lack of self awareness. I'm not even sure leaders are consciously aware when they are leading over, under, and around, and even though it's a tell, and what it tells, like you, to your point, is contextual, but it's telling something is not right. That to me usually says that we have a situation where someone needs to move on to something else when it comes to that place.
Yeah, yeah, I will tell you, I've been in plenty of circumstances where there's a challenging circumstance, situation, a lot of pressure on the business, and it doesn't always reveal a person's, best attributes, right? It reveals all the negatives that
That's a good
they
point.
bring to the
Yeah.
organization, right? And I think if we don't surround those leaders with people who are adept at providing, feedback or giving constructive, coaching, counseling, um, you can see the business go off the tracks really fast as people are afraid, they get quiet. There's a chilling effect on the whole organization that can shut down productivity, creativity, all those kind of things. And I've seen it happen all too many times. And you talk about, Jim, at the beginning of this call, what's, my role in the organization that I'm a part of? I think it's to help diagnose or identify these types of circumstances and make sure that we have a game plan to, to navigate through those. And I will tell you, as we seek to identify leaders down through the organization or develop and grow leaders, we want people to be more aware of situations like this or help develop them to the point where they can more effectively navigate through some of these, stressful organizational dynamics themselves.
Well, with the example I gave you, it exasperates the problem for everybody because it also teaches that next level leader, that direct report, that they have not been empowered to do whatever it is that they were supposed to do, and so they're going to take their hands off. And so once the leader interrupts the flow of work by stepping in front of, or however they got there to do it, they have affirmed, confirmed, whatever the right word is, that they really don't. It's really not their responsibility, and so therefore, there's no candid conversation. The boss goes back to what he was doing or she was doing, and just to complain about it later, and because we're talking about this difficult people conflict situation, but maybe the listeners could easily be misunderstood or could misunderstood that the difficult person might be us as a leader really shirking our responsibility, to work through others and what it takes to do that. In other words, for some people, they got somewhere because of technical skills, and now they're in a place where interpersonal skills is now elevated to an extreme height, and that seat feels very uncomfortable. And that goes back to my two columns that I referred to earlier: technical versus leadership. And to me, interpersonal skills falls under the domain of leadership. And to be frank, the first person I saw do this was me. That's the first person. I would get frustrated. I would delegate something. Well, I didn't even know the difference between delegation and empowerment at that time. So that was part of it. That's why I just think coaching is such a powerful thing. If you have a coach who knows what they're doing, and you have somebody who is open to learn, you have a real powerful partnership, similar to what you're talking about, what HR can be for a business, organization. There's a partnership there that can really save folks from a lot of pain, unnecessary pain.
You know that
Some is
that
some is necessary, right? Some
abs-
is necessary.
absolutely that prompts. It's interesting just to illustrate that point more. Where I came from, early career in the automotive industry, working in manufacturing plants. A key practice is to hire these fresh out engineers right out of college, right? And they go through rotational programs typically. Right? And by the way, this isn't just automotive industry. This happens everywhere, where people would go to work, these engineers, engineering product, working with engineering teams, great technical capabilities. But then through these rotational programs, they would send them out to the shop floor as production supervisors, right? Where now they're managing, labor contracts, where they're managing lines or cells or whatever the case is with 80 to 120 people. And that varies all over the place, I know. But we had a lot of cases where we had these highly technical people who just didn't have those people skills, and they were young and green, um, up against, and I'll say it that way intentionally, some hard nosed, old school, union employees, whatever the case was. By the way, and that's the environment I grew up in with my dad and kind of his shop colleagues, right? But it's very interesting. We had people who struggled to navigate through those circumstances, and what we started to do was focus equal attention, not just on technical capabilities when we were hiring, but on the people skills, right? Those leadership skills, those soft skills, and a little bit different profile. And we certainly brought some people in who had been in some, you probably get too far into the weeds here, but in some of these technical programs that put them in a position where they were out working side by side with the shop employees as they developed their degrees and different things like that. They were more adept or skilled at the people side of things along the way. So as we brought in new engineers, we started to do some targeted development programs and things like that just to help them start to develop those skills. But at the end of the day, it was all about building the right job specs or position profiles and evaluating not just the technical capabilities, but the fundamental leadership capabilities as well. And once we figured that out, and then we started to develop people at the same point in time, um, our level of engagement, our level of productivity, all of it just went straight up, right? And we enjoyed a lot more success as a business. It seems fundamental, but it's not necessarily the way things really work out day to day in business either. So we need to be very thoughtful is the message there.
Yeah, leadership, the always undervalued uh, and most misunderstood until it's absent. And when it's absent, then I think in business schools and in heck, even in seminaries, when people are preparing to lead churches, I hate to tell you, but they learn theology. They don't learn anything about leadership, and how much more difficult could leadership be when you're leading volunteers, primarily volunteers, versus paycheck. But even then, we need to view those that are getting a paycheck as volunteers, because they are trading their time and their life, for the company store, so to speak. But I think that the the hard work for us as business folks is to help people realize that though they might not be able to directly link it on their P&L, the return on investment for good leadership is exponential. But it's hard for a technical expert who gets elevated to supervisor or to manager or to director or to VP to believe that, because they're used to touching, the actual ROI, pushing the literal levers or the literal buttons to now being a leading an orchestra, being a maestro, learning the art, of leadership. It's quite a task, and I don't think it belongs to everybody. And I think that where America could use some adjustments is, if you don't become the CEO, you didn't fail. There's all kinds of the CEO is just one niche. It's
That's right.
it's one niche, and I'll tell you, some of the best leaders I've ever met and known are not CEOs. They're second chair leaders of some kind, and many CEOs who are cognitive of the complications and difficulty of leadership, they know that, and they appreciate second chair
Well, so I don't
leadership.
think there are a lot of leaders, and I don't think it's a natural skill for people to be adept at
No,
navigating through challenging people dynamics in any way, shape, or form. So again, Jim, this helps afford people like us career opportunities. So I will tell you, at the end of the day,
yeah,
I'm thankful for some of these difficult people in challenging circumstances.
yeah. Yeah. So how do you know when how do you know when your profession is starting, its fingerprints are starting to be seen in the organization? What are the tell signs that you're going, okay, we've got momentum happening here. There's positive things going on here. What does that look like?
So I'd say there are a couple of things there, right? And I do want to point to the scoreboard as a business leader, not just an HR person. I want to be able to point to the scoreboard, for the results of the business, right? Number one, I think it starts with alignment. Do people understand what's expected of them? Do they behave like they understand the expectations? Do they show up, well prepared, for meetings, for business report outs, for those kind of things, and not just report the weather, but tell the story, right? So those are some indicators early on. But then do we start to see, the numbers and the results dovetail with that theme, right? And that could be it could be profit, it could be any number of measures from a financial performance standpoint. We also look at our turnover. Um, I'm a big proponent of, careful with this. I think in the right circumstance and at the right time, and looking at, engagement surveys and things like that along the way, to determine how we stack up versus, our peer group of people that we compete with for talent, right? Do we have an engaged workforce? Recognizing that, outcomes improve when you have an engaged workforce, productivity improves with an engaged workforce, turnover is less with an engaged workforce. I think there are a number of things there. The other thing for me, and this one is much less scientific, a lot less conflict in general. I think when teams start to win collectively, you start to see some of those conflicts die down, and people start to embrace people who may have different styles or personalities than them. I think because they collectively realize that, hey, look, this person can help me win, and we are trying to win the right way. Excuse me. So there are any number of things, I think, Jim, that we can look at. But for me, number one, I love to look at the scoreboard. Is the business performing? I think that's what we're measured on by all of our shareholders at the end of the day. But then there are a lot of tells down below that are, I think, indicators of how well we're performing.
Excellent. What I wrote down that you said is some of the metrics or some of the ideas around the ROI for getting serious about HR work, in an organization, whether it's done by an HR person or the owner of a small company, and whatever partners he or she's able to gather. But the turnover, that's an easy metric, and I would probably say that we're both fans of Peter Drucker, so no matter how good, if there is such a thing, we get at hiring and onboarding, we still only have about a 33% chance of, according to Drucker's research, of hitting it out of the park.
That's right.
We have a 33% chance of no harm, no foul, but we also have a 33% chance of a train wreck. So I would imagine that the turnover has several aspects to it. Engagement, I think, I, as another example, would certainly impact the turnover metric. You talked about the scoreboard, the scorecard, and I wrote down profit. Bottom line,
Absolutely.
less conflict. I also wrote down, just because you got my brain moving. I would imagine that in every industry there is some sort of FTE metric. You know, in comparison to revenue. I know that in the smaller companies, I mean smaller. There's a general 40% number, associated with the cost of talent. That must go up and down, based upon industry. I'm sure, but I think if all these things are true, your FTE ratio would definitely come in line and maybe even be better than the industry average. I would think could be another measurement, right?
Yeah, I think that's a big one, right? I think alignment, organizational maturity, those things play into this one. And at the end of the day, if you've got a team that is clear on expectations and accountable and aligned around what that mission is, we have the opportunity to be a lot more efficient, a lot more productive, right? To your point, we should be a lot more efficient.
So let me ask you this question. You have the opportunity to sit down with a person that has just been promoted to a vice president role, or you have the same opportunity for somebody that's going to start with some significant backing, a brand new company. What in a broad sweeping manner would be the principles that, if they had the ability to absorb in that 1 hour session, what is it that you would say to folks when it comes to this whole idea of conflict, difficult people, and as you have, I think, very well unfolded, that involves so many different things.
Yeah, I think ultimately what leaders need to understand is their success and whatever role they're in is ultimately going to be determined by the people who work for them, right? So having people who are first and foremost aligned around the mission, and operating under a certain set of values, I think it's critically important to make sure we're stressing those things and ensuring alignment down through the organization. Um, I'm a big fan of coaching them up on circulating with the troops, getting to know their people and understanding what motivates their people and how they operate, as well as what work they're really doing and how it contributes to the success of the organization. And the other thing I ask leaders to do is to approach every opportunity that, where they're interacting with people, especially early on, with a lot of candor around how they operate. Jim, in my case, I spend a lot of time talking to my team about, look, these are the things that I'm going to struggle with, and these are the things that I'm good at, right? Like claiming it, owning it, and here are the things that I've been told are gray spots for me, right? So just being really candid with the team and asking for their help and their support is, as I try to assimilate into a role, and for our leaders, encouraging them to ask for help as they assimilate into a new role. And I do think it's important, that listening piece is going to be critically important. I think my role as an HR leader, or any of the HR business partners in my organization or companies that I've been in, I think they have an obligation with the new leaders, their business partners, to make sure they provide some intel in advance, right, on the people that they're going to be working with. We've got people who may be, in some regards, a little bit challenging to work with based on a personality, but they produce great results, right? There's a balance there, right? Winning and winning the right way. It can't be all about winning at no cost, right? There's got to be good balance there. But I think giving leaders some insight into how to navigate through some of the challenging interpersonal dynamics on teams is really important for HR. But I think for leaders themselves, especially when they get to a certain level, they need to be able to look at those teams, listen, and assess, what's the best way to navigate with some of the people in the group as well. So I can't underscore that listening side of things enough. But again, listening, seeking first to understand, speaking with candor about a person's own strengths and weaknesses, and asking for help from the team as you're going to assimilate into a new role. I think those are critical components.
This has been great. Really good stuff. I wrote down words like this as I just listening to you. Listen. How can we miss that? Listen. I also wrote down dynamic process, which to me means that if you desire, to serve others by leading them, and I do look at it that way,
Great point.
you do need be a person of energy. I just have to speak the truth. You have to have an internal drive and energy for people, for people's good, organizing people, dealing with people's messes, celebrating with people. It takes a lot of energy. Similar to that, agility, empathy. Empathy. You got to want to win, though. You got to have that, Tom Brady mindset. You got to be training when no one else is watching or paying attention. Clint, we didn't talk about that a whole lot, but in parting here, I think the greatest weakness. I know that's a big statement. I'm pondering that for a second. I don't know that I'm going to take that back. I think at least certainly fighting for the top three positions of weaknesses is leaders are not developing themselves. Personal development, just to me, seems to be lacking. And there's empathy that goes with that statement. I understand that the business world goes fast, and the quarterly report, the monthly report. It's go, 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 go. I get that. And because of that, even more so, I would strongly encourage leaders to ask themselves, how am I taking care of myself? Physically, spiritually, relationally, intellectually, whatever, however we fill that big thing called the human being, right? And then the last phrase I wrote down, just listening to you, is, if someone was listening to this podcast and they wanted to know, all right, how do I know when everything's perfect? Well, it's not going to happen. And I wrote down dynamic process. This is the dynamic process. In the ministry, we have a term that is understood. If it's not understood, it should be. Is that when you go into the ministry, you think that you're going in there to help people. And that is certainly true. But what you don't realize is that in the process of doing that, you have no clue what God wants to do in you. So it is when we have the right attitude of serving others that we receive the benefit from a divine source, because we become better people and better leaders through the process, because the course of leadership is grueling and is respecter of no persons. None of us get straight A's. It's a difficult process. Sometimes we scratch our head. Here's the other truth. Clint, see what you say about this. I think it's possible to do everything right in leadership and still lose.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that, right? There are circumstances, no matter how much you prepare, no matter how hard you work, things aren't going to turn out in your favor. Right?
Too many variables. Too many variables.
Way too many variables, especially when you're dealing with human beings.
That's right.
And market conditions that are rapidly changing, emerging technologies, right? There are a million things that we can point to, but there are going to be situations or circumstances when you just don't win.
That's right, and that's why we got to enjoy the journey. We got to enjoy the process. We got to enjoy it, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we'll be better for it. we'll be better for it.
It's interesting. I was thinking about this thing. Your words prompted these thoughts, right? At the end of the day, I want to win, right? And I want to win the right way.
Yeah.
Winning is subjective. And I have this conversation with my kids all the time, right? What does winning mean? At the end of the day, as long as my kids are good people who contribute to society, and they embrace the values that we've tried to bring them up with, then you know what? I'm going to consider that a win. Business leaders, you win through your people, and it's all about setting clear expectations, effectively delegating, flying at the right altitude, holding people accountable, right? There's a lot there. And then I do think it's critical that we flex, and we talked about this at the beginning of the conversation, and Jim, it hits right at the heart of what you were talking about just now, humility, right? I think we all need to strive to be continuous learners and seek to improve or get better. When I went through this exercise, kind of that list of things that make people difficult, or thinking about situations where, I'm pointing at someone else, and then I looked in the mirror. There are a lot of things that I've been chewing on the last few days. I've actually gone back to a few colleagues and friends and said, "Hey, look, I want to apologize," and they kind of laughed at me, right? And we talked through some things, but it's served as a platform for some really good conversations. But I think a little introspection is good for everyone along the way. And I do think, candidly, some of our biggest critics can be our best sources of learning. So always keeping an open mind and listening actively, pausing, taking a deep breath, I think is pretty critical along the way.
As my dad once said to me, have you ever considered that you might be part of the problem?
I heard my wife say that to one of my kids there, the person they're dating, who was kind of going on a tangent about all these difficult people. And I won't say he or she, I don't want to give this away, but my wife, who always has perfectly timed comments that are very thoughtful, said, it sounds like you have a problem with a lot of people who are bad people. Have you ever considered maybe that this is a problem with you, right? And it didn't have a chilling effect on the whole car, but it was well placed, right? And there was enough love and trust and care in the car that I think everyone probably took that the right way. But, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it's interesting. The reality of it is we're always going to deal with different people, right? And they're all going to bring something different to every equation. And I try to keep in mind that we can't control other people, but we can absolutely control the way we respond to them. So for me, the most important thing is, and I think I've learned this over time, I'm not perfect by any stretch. And I've had my emotional reactions from time to time, even in this business that I'm a part of today. But if we can control our own reactions and seek to respond in a thoughtful, constructive way, we can do a whole lot to create a more peaceful environment for all our people, whether it's at home or in an office setting or in a business in general. We certainly can be, instruments of peace in the world, and we need more of that.
Yeah, very good. And I really appreciate the time that you have invested in your preparation. You have reminded me today that conflict is a symptom, and if we approach it correctly, we can uncover powerful truths, some great solutions. People can be treated with respect, even if we need to go in different directions. If you do strive to be a leader, understand that you're choosing to take on more weight, not more privilege. And leadership is synonymous with conflict. But remember what we've talked about. And how did that phrase go again? When we ignore it versus you said it.
What you ignore becomes more. What you address becomes less.
And I think that's a great place to leave this podcast today. Mr. Clint Pies, I sure appreciate your expertise. I admire. We didn't even get to talk about talent assessment, but maybe we can do that another time, another podcast, because I think that is brilliant, proactive. Quadrant 2. My listeners are familiar with Quadrant 2 terminology. Quadrant 2 work that is often left into the behind us because of the tornadoes of Quadrant 1. But thank you so much.
Well, Jim, it's been a pleasure. I always feel better off after I get to spend some time with you. So Thanks for having me, and look forward to talking again soon.
If you're not part of the Lead Today community, let me invite you. Go to leadtodaycommunity.com. That's leadtodaycommunity.com and sign up for Monday Moments. It's a weekly email that will encourage your leadership. Again, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for telling a friend about the Today Counts show.